So in today's video, we are going to be talking about the first FC25 investment you guys should be making. So between now and the 6th of October, I'm going to be uploading a daily free eafc25 trading guide. This will include everything to do on the web app to make as many coins as possible with both trading and investing. I'll be talking about the full release, what we expect to see regarding the market. And there'll also be a daily updated investing guide, all in there, updated every day for free. No gimmicks whatsoever, all you gotta do is click on the Google Docs link on the top link of the description. So what we're going to be doing is talking about the first FC25 investment you guys should be making. I've gone into a lot of research and going into a lot of depth about the specific sort of players you want to be buying, when you want to be buying them, when you want to be selling them, and other sort of investments you guys can get away with. Before we do start, tomorrow I will be doing another I value your guys or I price predict your guys teams. So if you guys do want to go and send me your teams, what you want to do is head over to easysbc.io. You then want to go to squad builders. You then want to go and build your squad. So for example, let's say I want to go and put in Rashford because he's probably a player I know I can spell. There we go. Once you've built your squad, you can then press share. Then you go and copy the link, and then what you need to do is either send it to me on Twitter or send it to me on email. I'll pin a comment in the comment section with my email and my Twitter to go and send me your teams. So let's go and talk about the investing. Now again, the investment we're going to talk about is going to be talking about day one of the Ultimate Edition. I will briefly cover the web app investments if you guys haven't already. Now, it's quite easy to go and get yourself around about 5-10k on the web app. If you're not sure how to, I do have a video talking about how to trade on the web app. So once you're on the web app, what you're going to go and invest in is you're going to go and invest in French players and you're going to go invest in Prem players who are about 2 to 5k. This is only gives you data from the 21st. The web app was out as of the 20th, so prices were actually cheaper than what it says here. So for example, like Konate would have gone from like 2k to 5.6k, Anthony would have gone from probably about 1.5k to 4k, and finally Bruno Guimaraes would have gone from about 6.8k all the way up there to, would have gone from about 5k to 8k. So there would have been some nice profit. Regarding selling the players, you sell them before the Ultimate Edition comes out because there was a crash when the Ultimate Edition came out, which we'll be covering in the video. So yeah, these sort of players that I expect to be able to go and invest in next year is stuff such as Bowie, players such as Konate, players such as Sarr, players such as Joelinton, Delo and Tobido. Again, these are going to be players that you're going to go invest on the web app and sell before the Ultimate Edition. So now getting on to what the video is going to be all about is investing in players on the Ultimate Edition. Because actually the investments aren't as simple as just go and buy these players. Because last year there was a very, very different trend to what we've had in previous years. Is this image here. Now I've got these images from Foot Accountant's video last year because Footbin doesn't give you an hour-to-hour sort of thing, therefore it doesn't paint the whole picture. But if you look at an hour-to-hour sort of price on FC25, you'll get more of an idea. So this is in Cuckoo right here. Now in Cuckoo, on the release of the Ultimate Edition was 175k. Then the Ultimate Edition probably came out around about midday and he dropped from 175k down there to 75k. But then later in the day dropped down there to 65k. And in fact later, even later, dropped down there to 50k. So, and then he was the cheapest, if I can go and find, yeah, he was the cheapest between around about midnight where he was 50k and 1 AM the following morning about 65k. So you basically had between about 11 at night all the way through to 1 in the morning to go and get your players for the cheapest. This is UK time, I believe it'd be GMT. So, you know, put into Google whatever that is for yourselves. But yeah, so recommending you guys to go and invest in specific players is all well and good, but it's more about investing at specific times. Because this is kind of shown right here. So in Cuckoo game was 175k, way overpriced. The Ultimate Edition then came out and he got as cheap as 50k. But if we go and look a few days later, he got all the way up there to 98k. Meaning you could have bought in Cuckoo for 50k, held on to him for 3 days, and he would have gone up to 100k. This didn't only happen within Cuckoo. This also occurred, if I can go and find the image, with Bon Matip. Bon Matip was 220k, if I can go and find that image. Is the 220k image here? No. But yeah, Bon Matip was about 280k before the game came out. The game then came out and she went down to 220. But going into midnight, she absolutely crashed from 220k all the way down here to 95k, which again is midnight, the day that the Ultimate Edition is released. She then rose from 95k all the way up there to 296k. Now it says that the cheapest she was 135k, and that's because only for an hour or two was she 95k, which means that the daily average wasn't, 95k as 135k. And she therefore went from 95k all the way up to 296k. So the profit, you could have doubled your coins or tripled your coins, and all you have to do is hold on to cards for 3 days and buy them at the right times and buy the right sort of cards. So again, in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about what are the right sort of cards. Because the wrong sort of cards are cards like Van der Ven. Van der Ven, on the release of the game, again, where cards, when Cuckoo went from 50k to 100k, Van der Ven went from 20k to 20k. Another example, St. Maxim. St. Maxim went from 20k to 20k. So why didn't St. Maxim and Van der Ven go up loads when the Ultimate Edition came out? Well, also the same amount of people selling Van der Ven and St. Maxim. As a result, what this meant is it meant that the card didn't go up in price because, again, the demand was equal to the supply. And this kind of happened for anything that was about 20k and 30k and below. Now, stuff below 20, 30k actually dropped because there are more people packing these cards and upgrading to the cards, but the cards about 20 to 30k themselves held. What this means is if you guys do want to go and use cards like Van der Ven and St. Maxim, you can buy them and you don't really have to worry about them dropping until the Ultimate Edition, or if they drop before that, which we'll talk about later in the video. But if you actually want to make money, you're not going out and buying 20 to 30k cards, because the 20 to 30k cards are just too supplied. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what sort of cards really went up. Now the sort of cards that went up were cards that were 40k and above, basically. So I can show you these two sort of examples, right? So we've got Van der Ven, someone who didn't go up, but then we've got someone like Saliba, who again was about 45k, and we can see that he went from 45k all the way up here to 70k. But if we go and head over to DRB, we can see the same thing right here. He went from 45k up there to 75k. Why did this occur? Now this occurred because there weren't as many people buying, or there weren't as many people packing DRB and Saliba as there were the amount of people upgrading to them. Because a lot of people would have had 20k, they then would have played a bit of the games, or they would have opened some packs, or they would have done some means of earning coins, and then what they would now do is they'd have 20k extra. Because they'd have 20k extra, what they'll now go and do is they'll go and buy Saliba, and they'll go and buy DRB, but they'll go and sell their Van der Ven and sell their St. Maxim. And this means that these cards go up in price because, of course, there is more people upgrading to them than there are people packing them. And also, with Van der Ven and St. Maxim, there's also enough people upgrading from them, which means they're selling them, that doesn't allow them to go up in price. So we basically now know that the minimum we want to go and invest in players is going to be about 30, 40k. We don't invest in anything below 30, 40k because we know that those players are being packed as much as they're demanded, whereas we know that the cards that are 30, 40k or above are demanded as much as they're being packed. So the cards that I think as a result would be like Van der Ven, and cards that would be 20, 30k and not really work, stuff like LaCroix. LaCroix is a very, very similar card to Van der Ven last year, and as a result of him having a very similar card to Van der Ven last year, we don't think this card is really going to go up. Because, again, we think it gets packed as much as demanded. In the end of the day, it's a 76 rated card. 76 rated cards are just going to get packed a lot. Likewise, St. Maxim. St. Maxim next year should be the exact same as St. Maxim this year, where he shouldn't really go up in price because there's as many people upgrading to St. Maxim as there are as many people selling St. Maxim. So we know that the minimum that we kind of want to invest in these players is about 30 to 40k. So let's talk a little bit about the maximum we want to go and invest in the players. Now, the thing you'll be happy to know is anything over 40k went up. So, if you don't really care about investing, anything above 40k went up. But it didn't rise as decent of a percentage. For example, we've got something like Valverde. And Valverde went from 300k to 400k. Now, there is an argument they might have been 200, 250 on the first day, just like how Bon Matip was cheaper than what the footbin graphs showed. But yeah, so he was about 300k and went up to 400k, meaning he only went up around about a third of his price. Whereas, if we go and look at something a bit cheaper like DRB, we can see DRB went from 50k up to 70k. Which means he basically went up a minimum of half of what he was going for. So as a result of seeing that Valverde didn't rise as much as DRB, this means that if we want to make as many coins as possible, what we do is rather than buying one Valverde, we just go and buy 6 DRBs. Because those 6 DRBs would, as a result, rather than him only being worth 400k, those 6 DRBs would probably be worth about 500k. So we'd make more money by investing in loads of cheap players over more expensive players. So we know that we're not going to buy players who are 400k. So let's ramp it down a bit. What about players who are about 220? Well, we move on to Dembele. Dembele only went from 220 up there to 280. So he only went up 60k for a card that was 220. Well, I mean, Saliba, we'll go back to Saliba now. Saliba went up around about 35k for someone who was only 60. Which means, again, if I was to go and put the same amount in Saliba as it cost me for one Dembele, I'd go and make myself an extra 40, 50k. So we know that we don't buy cards at 220. unless they're heroes and icons, which I'll be talking about later in the video. We then move on to Rafael Leao. So what about cards that are... Yeah, no, I don't think Rafael Leao's... What about cards that are around about 120? Well, he went from 120 to 180, so Leao's rise was actually as good as Dembele's, but he was 100k less. So you could go and buy 2 Leao's for the price of Dembele, and you'd make double the amount of coins, rather than buying 1 Dembele. And again, the reason this happened is because Leao is cheaper, and as a result of being cheaper, there's more people upgrading to him. But what about if we look at cards a little bit cheaper than that? So 120k, that's pretty decent. They're doing well. What about cards that are only 80k? Well, cards that are only 80k, we've got ourselves Kyle Walker as an example, went from 80k all the way up there to 134. So Kyle Walker had a really, really high rise. Not quite doubling in price, but he had a really nice rise. Yeah, so let's go even cheaper than that. Let's move on to, if I can go and grab him, Rafael Varane. Rafael Varane was around about 65k, and he went from 65k all the way up there to 150. So again, near enough doubled in price. But if we go back to Valverde, he wasn't doubling in price. If we go back to Dembele, he wasn't doubling in price. It was only these cards, again, now we're getting closer to around about 70, 80k that they're allowing to double. And why do these cards double but the top ones don't? Because there's way more people who manage to get themselves an extra 40, 50k to upgrade players in their team than there are people getting 350k. So as a result, the most optimal sort of price to go and buy players at is around about 40k to 80k. So as a result, I've got you guys a bunch of players who I think are around about 40k to 80k who you could go and buy next year. Now, the players that I've used as an example are cards that actually had really good rises last year, and their new cards aren't too far from that. Maybe they're a little bit better and move them to the top end of the 40 to 80k than the bottom end. Now, this isn't me predicting these players being 40 to 80k once they've risen. This is me predicting these players to be 40 to 80k on day 1 of the Ultimate Edition. And actually, in fact, they should double in whatever I say they are, give or take. So, for example, Sleeper, I think, will be more towards the top end of that, but I think he can easily go from about 80 to 150k. Oregio, again, he would have followed this trend last year, would have been about 70, 80, moving up to around about 140. We then move on to Krachawi. We didn't really have any prices from her last year, but when she was back in pack, she was about 60. So, yeah, but I think she'll do pretty nicely. We then move on to Rodrigo. Rodrigo, again, was about 50k last year. Slight upgrade, but last year he literally doubled in price, and I think the exact same thing could happen with this year with Rodrigo. Conde, definitely towards the upper end there. Last year he went from around about 90k to 170k. So again, you can see doubling in price right there. Really, really good. Then move on to Mendy. Mendy actually underperformed other players of his price, but, you know, still semi-decent. Going, I think, from about 80 to 130. So not quite doubling in price, but, yeah, still did pretty well nonetheless. And that kind of wraps up the players we think. Now, what about selling these players? You know, when's the best time to go and sell these players? So, in previous years, so this is why we have the Kyle Walker up here. If I can go and find where the Kyle Walker... Here you go. In previous years, these cards would just rise and rise and rise, all the way through to Ultimate Edition, and actually sometimes through to the first Weekend League. But this didn't occur last year. In fact, in last year, they peaked 3 days before the Ultimate Edition. So why did cards not follow the same trend as previous years? Now, there's loads of variables you could throw down to it. One, obviously, well, 2 years ago we didn't have untradeable advanced SBCs, but yeah, no advanced SBCs, no welcome back packs. Obviously, there's more emphasis on Evos this year. There was more promo packs at the beginning, more untradeable promo packs. And also, I'd say the inflation was a lot heavier. I mean, he went from, what, 80k to 140 in 1 to 3 days. But if we go and look at previous years, what did he go? He went from 40k to, I guess, went 40k to 9k. It's still quite heavy inflation, but basically this inflation wasn't sustainable, especially with there being way less coins on the market because of all the welcome backpacks not being there and no advanced SBCs and so on. Because this wasn't sustainable, people couldn't keep paying an extra 20, 30k a day for Kyle Walker to go up, like, otherwise he would end up being like 160, 180, 200. No one actually had coins and was willing to pay that for Kyle Walker. So eventually what happened is the demand slowed down, and because the demand slowed down, people weren't buying and he wasn't rising. And then that created a bit of panic selling, and then he started dropping. Whereas normally he'd actually rise all the way through to the 29th. Now, he might only have been 134k but rise slowly to the 29th, but in previous years they'd rise all the way through to the 29th. But luckily there are indications on when these cards are going to not rise through to the Ultimate Edition. And the indication is, if we go and look at previous years, you see how they rose every single day. There was no day when they plateaued out between the web app release and the Ultimate Edition. Every single day at minimum he was going up like 10, 15k, right? So, when we saw that the card plateaued out before the Ultimate Edition, that was a bit of an indication that okay, well, I don't think they're quite following the normal trend. So, as a result of not quite following the normal trend, it would have been a bit of an indication, okay, that's not the norm, we probably want to go and sell. So, but we had a buffer day, right? We had a day where they didn't rise before they started dropping, which is good because in previous years, again, they'd keep rising and rising and rising. So as soon as we see them not rising, and we're talking on average of 24 hours, not like an hour or two, because every now and again you'll have an hour or two where the cards won't rise, or maybe even go down a little bit. What you're then going to do is sell, when there's been no rise from the day before to the current day, for the average of the day. And then you're going to go and sell, because it's only after they had one day of holding did they start dropping. It's kind of a bit like a roller coaster. It went up and up and up and up, and then you had the top bit, and then they kind of went back down again. And as long as you can catch the top bit here, you're looking good. But again, the problem is this was quite unpredictable, because every other year the market would just rise going into the Ultimate Edition, but it didn't last year. So we would go and sell the cards, again, either the Ultimate Edition or the release before that. Now what we're going to do is talk a little bit about Team of the Weeks, because there's slightly different trends. First off, we'll talk about the cheap Team of the Weeks. Cheap Team of the Weeks were quite interesting because, like I said earlier, 20k cards didn't actually hold value regarding golds. But if we go and look how a 20k Team of the Week did, they actually rose from 20 to 27. So if you want to go, if you've got 20k and you want to go and invest in someone and have someone for your team, now I definitely agree that Hummel's in form is not quite as desirable as Van de Ven. But Van de Ven in this period probably goes from about 20 to 15k, whereas Hummel's goes from 20 to 27k. So you can use someone in your team and make money with more low-end players. We now move on to more mid, I guess low to mid. We've got ourselves Lamptey, who again was about 40k, went up to around about 72k, so the same sort of trend as gold cards who were 40k. So yeah, that was pretty nice. Doku kind of underperformed how the gold cards were, in terms of he went from 53k up there to 76k. Not an amazing performance regarding if you're to invest in a gold who was 50k, they probably would have ended up being a little bit higher. In fact, I'm pretty sure he ended up about the same price as Saliba, but was 10k more than Saliba. But again, they're okay investments, they're just not as good as the golds. And again, if we look at more of the top end of that 40 to 80k, we can see that Dybala only went from 95 to 131, which is underperforming in comparison to maybe if we went and looked at someone like Kyle Walker, who I think ended up being below 80, but then ended up being higher than 130. But again, they were okay. We then move on to Salah. So just like I was saying, Valverde only went from like 300 to 400. Salah, I guess by that would have only gone from about 500 to 550, but actually Salah did really well. So if you want to go invest in top-end gold cards and you're not sure, should I invest in I don't know, maybe a Neymar or a Salah, I don't know, a 400k gold card or Salah will actually rise where the gold cards won't rise as much. So if you have 500k and you want to make points and use top players, you're looking at Team of the Weeks. We then look at Krachawi. Krachawi kind of went against the grain of what the norm was. The norm would be that she'd only be about 180, but I think because we had the new women's meta, she actually outperformed the gold cards. So the gold cards, who are 40 to 80k, near doubled. She actually over doubled, but I would say that's probably down to the woman being the new meta, which obviously would have been something easy in hindsight, but not too easy with the release. So yeah, she performed really well, but I wouldn't be really investing in inform cards over gold cards. If you want the most coins, I'd only be buying them if you just wanted to, use them. Only if you wanted to go and buy like 400k players who are Team of the Weeks or golds, I'd go and buy Team of the Weeks. Although heroes and icons are better. And likewise, if I wanted to go and buy a 20k gold or inform card, the inform would be better to go and buy. We're now going to move on to heroes, because these guys had different trends and actually some really nice trends. So the bottom end cards, such as Crouch, again 40k player, these were the most optimal for gold cards, only went from about 40k to 60k, which is okay but not as good as gold cards. Rickon again 30k here to 40k, so again not really too good, buying the bottom end ones. Mid-range ones also weren't too amazing. Rosicky 82k to 121k, that's underperforming what the gold cards did. And Dudek did 62 to 86, which is pretty decent, but again still underperforming the gold cards. So heroes, mid and below, underperforming how the gold cards did. Underperforming how the gold cards did, but if you want to use them in your team, they still go up nonetheless. Just you make more money if you bought gold cards. We then move on to the top end heroes, and the top end heroes are very interesting because if you were to go and buy, he's kind of got the same sort of trend as Salah. Salah did 400k to 700k, but gold cards who are 400k didn't do 400k to 700k. So buying top end heroes is actually better than buying top end gold cards, and it's on par with buying the top end Team of the Weeks. Same with McManaman here, you can see 113 there, up there to around about 190. And finally Brolin, 180 up there to 280. Again, Dembele went from 220 to 280, but Brolin 40k cheaper went to the same price. So buying mid to top tier heroes is as good, if not better, than buying mid to top tier icons. Golds. Now moving on to icons, and these cards are really, really good. So obviously the problem with icons is the minimum price you can get these for is 80. So if you're looking for a bunch of 40k investments, you'd obviously need to, sell 2 40k investments to have an 80k one. But these are pretty decent, better than heroes, better than inform cards. Some were not as good as golds, but some were near on par with gold. So we got Keane, for example, went from 84 to 130. That's okay, but the others performed a bit better. For example, Gattuso went from 80k there all the way up to 156. So he actually doubled in price between 80 to 157. So he was as good as performing as... he performed as good as some of the Premier League 40 to 80k cards. Then got Bobby Moore, went from 86 all the way up there to 167. So again, doubled in price. You weren't really getting too many... you didn't get too many gold cards that had this trend. We then move on to Zanetti. So again, the 200k gold cards, players like Dembele only went from 220 to 280. Zanetti went from 200k to 440. So that is an insane performance. In fact, Zanetti performed as good as the 40 to 80k golds, but he was a 200k player. So these sort of like mid-tier icons did extremely well. I actually researched a lot of them, and I must check about 15, 20 of them, and they all had this sort of trend. I mean, we move on to Hierro, 100k, went from 100k to 190k. Near doubled. You weren't getting too many golds with that trend. Hadji went from 130 up here to 260, nearly doubled. You weren't getting gold cards going from 120. You got Liao, who went from 120 to 170. But these icons were just heavily outperforming how the gold cards did. We then move on to like the mid tiers, and even these, again, you weren't getting gold cards going from 380 up there to 650. Not quite doubling in price, but still outperforming gold cards. SEN, this was a great one, 400k to 800k. You weren't getting 400k gold cards, you weren't getting 400k informs, doubling in price. We look at Rio, 500k there to 900k. Again, very nice. We then move on to Matthias, 1.3 million, up there to 2 million. So it kind of slows down once you seem to get past that 1 million coin mark. Not quite near doubling in price, but still, you're getting half you would have paid for the player as profit. And likewise with Cantona, goes from 500 to 2.1. So kind of like, the further you get away from 1 million on the top end, the lower the profit you're making. But anything under 1 million was amazing. Almost as good as performing as the best performing golds. There is a few criticisms with icon investing. One, obviously you need a bit of coins. Two, the criticism is that this isn't necessarily what they would have been selling for. So Footbin operates by showing you the average cheapest they've been listing for the last 24 hours. So the cheapest Cantona on the market, let's say, was 2.1 million all day. It'd show on Footbin 2.1 million. But it doesn't necessarily mean people are buying him for 2.1 million. So that's kind of the problem that we have, is that it's what they're listed for, not what they're being bought for. So there is an argument saying that, well, people aren't actually buying him for 2.1 million, so even though the profit looks good, it isn't actually there. Whereas a gold card that's, let's say, 600k, you know that people are buying it for 600k. If Footbin says 600k, maybe apart from the first day. So that is the only criticism, is that maybe even though Zanetti looks like he doubled in price, was anyone actually buying him at 430? Although, I'll be honest with you, I think they were. Because it follows the normal trends. He held 430, give or take, for like 3 days. So if he's holding that price for 3 days, there's got to be some people buying him within that. So, yeah, I really like 40 to 80k gold cards. And if you can afford them, I'd go and you can go and buy any icons you want whatsoever. Or ideally, the more meta for the value you can. So obviously, if you had 100k or below, I'd prefer to go and buy maybe someone like... Who do we have? I'd prefer to go and buy someone more like Gattuso than I probably would Riquelme, because I'd imagine they're a little bit more demanded. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Again, the icons all seem to peak at the same time, the 26th. Otherwise, it would have been the full release. Nice thing with icons is they hold their value a lot better for the long term. But I've kind of covered that a lot in the previous video. But that is going to go and wrap that up. Thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you guys tomorrow with another Pricing Your Guys Starter FC25 teams.